Hi, happy World AIDS Day, everybody.
Happy World Day.
Oh my goodness, we could do a little better than that. Happy World AIDS Day, everybody.
Happy World.
Oh my goodness, like come on, we're only midday. I hate this mic, but that's okay. Yeah, I want that mic. I don't like this one at all.
Just pass it.
Yeah, it's just like I'm not feeling that at all, honey. Yeah, you just sit right there. Okay, hi, my name is Jeremy Teel. I am a wonderful artist and activist here in Austin, Texas. Yes, I called myself wonderful because I am. Before I get this party started, I want you to give it up for my jacket.
Look at that.
I'm just saying, it's a day of celebration, people, okay? We're celebrating. Oh, and shoes. They're a little green moment. Okay, I can't stretch that far. It is leather. Everybody calm down. Okay, so I'm part of the planning committee for this fantastic conference, and I'm so happy to see you all here. This grows every year, and it gets even better every single year. So for sure, next year, make sure you bring more people. I have the pleasure of introducing two of my friends. Like these, I know these guys. They're really dope. Sergeant Michael Crumrine of Austin Police Department, and Emiliano Diaz de Leon of TASA, Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. Will you all introduce yourselves, and then I'll explain why y'all are here. Is that okay?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Crumrine, Sergeant with the Austin Police Department. My current assignment is I am over the child abuse unit, but I've worked in violent crime with crimes against persons ever since 2009. So I'm also the president of our Lesbian and Gay Peace Officers Association, which is the first and only of its kind in the state of Texas. My pronouns are he and him. Thank you. And I've spent the majority of my investigative career working in intimate partner violence and sexual violence overall, and then specifically I teach and instruct both nationally and internationally into the realm of queer identified individuals with intimate partner violence and sexual violence. And I am ecstatic to have the opportunity to be here and chat with y'all for a little bit today.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Emiliano Diaz de Leon. I am the men's engagement specialist with the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm really happy to be with y'all this afternoon. I have been with TASA for the last 16 years. I'm going to be celebrating my sweet 16 early next year. Looking forward to that. So my role at TASA is to provide training and technical assistance to sexual assault advocates, educators, folks who are doing prevention work around the state of Texas, primarily at rape crisis centers, including SAFE here in Austin, but to all the rape crisis centers around the state. And I work specifically around the issues of healthy masculinities and engaging and organizing men and male-identified folks around the state of Texas to sort of get involved and prevent sexual violence in their communities. So I'm really happy to be with y'all this afternoon. I appreciate the invitation to be able to talk specifically about the experiences of sexual assault survivors from the queer community, and really think about ways that we collectively can prevent and help folks heal who have had those experiences of sexual assault or sexual abuse. And so I'm just really happy to be with you all this afternoon, especially on World AIDS Day.
We're excited to have you. Okay, so now it's being nice to me. That's why I'm holding this mic now. Okay, so the name of this one is Ethical Dilemmas of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence. I'm going to read this paragraph because it makes more sense if I read it. The presentation will discuss how sexual assault and domestic violence differs among LGBTQ plus communities versus the general population. Concerns with violence against transgender individuals, how you all can assist clients that might or might not be living with abuse or assault, and how the action of keeping HIV confidentiality close to the vest versus the idea of mandating it actually affects our clients. So you can see why we have these fantastic people here, because this is literally what you all do day in and day out for the general public. But for you specifically have a wonderful lens of queerness, and you very specifically have a men's sexual or a men's assault thing. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with y'all. Okay, so question number one, are we excited?
We are.
Are we excited? Are y'all excited? Oh, Okay, well, I love woos. Okay, I'm just letting you know. It's one of my favorite sounds in the world. Okay, how does, well, and let's just go with you first. How does sexual assault and domestic violence present differently in the LGBTQ plus community from your lens?
That's a great question. So when you're talking about intimate partner violence and you're talking about sexual violence, in regards to the actual act and everything else, it's similar, but what you really get into is the various different control tactics that are used, and the coercive control and stressors that are used mainly in intimate partner violence within the queer community versus the heterosexual community, because it's a completely different lens. The queer community still faces, in many aspects, the fear of being outed. That is still a very big control tactic that is used both within intimate partner violence and then also when somebody has been sexually assaulted, and whether or not they wish or are willing to access the systems that are in place. Because when you access most of the systems, especially law enforcement or the criminal justice system, when you do that, that police report is a public document. The arrest affidavit is a public document. The state of Texas recognizes that, and there's certain things they've put in place, like having what we call a pseudonym. Are y'all familiar with that term at all? Okay. So what a pseudonym is in the state of Texas, anybody who is the survivor of human trafficking, domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault, doesn't matter how they identify or anything along those lines, is entitled to having a pseudonym, which is a fake name assigned to them in all public documents that the public would have access to. Okay, it is a right given to them underneath the laws of the state of Texas. So asking for that creates that anonymity in all of our police reports. When you go into court, obviously the person who attacked you is going to know, right? If it's an intimate partner violence case, they know who you are. It's designed to keep your information out of the public, okay, as best as possible. And so a lot of people may not understand that, but still a lot of people may not be willing to step into that realm, right, and access us. I'll be the first one to admit, I've been a cop. I'm working on my 37th year in law enforcement, not all with the Austin Police Department. But we have historically not been the most welcoming of individuals to marginalized communities when marginalized communities have been touched by violence. Okay, we understand that. We're trying to get better. There's many things we've done here in Austin, but that still takes time. And it takes building a rapport with somebody where they feel comfortable enough to access us. And I'm not going to say that being the survivor of intimate partner violence or sexual violence, that the police are necessarily the one and only avenue for you to go down. The important thing is for you to get services and for you to heal and for you to be better, right? And be in a better place when you've suffered that violence.
So having said, since you said marginalized communities, I just think of like just individual parts of our communities, because we say LGBTQIA plus, right? Well, in that we have lots of intersections, and one of the wonderful things that Emiliano gets to do, and when I get to make it, I get to go to his fantastic online support group for men who have survived or want more information on violence. And I'm just curious, like, what is your lens? Like, how do you see this presenting in males that are identifying the fact that they have had this experience and would like resources or would like to report it or talk about it?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. So I just want to encourage folks in the room, especially during this particular conversation, I just want to acknowledge that there are survivors in the room, right? There are folks who have these lived experiences. And of course, there are folks in the room who are working with people who have experienced interpersonal violence and sexual abuse. So I want to encourage you to take care of yourself, right? So, and to seek out the kind of support that you need from your peers, your colleagues, as well as from SAFE, right? Because I think, SAFE is a tremendous resource that we have here in Austin. They have been around for almost 50 years. They're celebrating 50 years next year. And they do phenomenal work, right? They're providing services directly to victims and survivors of sexual violence, sexual abuse, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, etc. So I was very fortunate to start as a victim advocate there and to work specifically with children who had witnessed domestic and sexual violence, who had been abused themselves at the family shelter here in Austin. And so I understand as an advocate, like many of you who maybe serve as advocates in your community, who are supporting people who have had these experiences, right? How important it is what the sergeant was saying in terms of that rapport, that relationship, the trust that we have in the community with the clients that we serve, because they're more likely to disclose their experiences of violence and abuse with you as somebody who is safe, as somebody who is a helper, who is providing some kind of service, right? Whether you're a family member, a friend, you're the victim or survivor is more likely to disclose that to you before they disclose it to Austin APD, right? And so I think that's really important for us to understand that folks are going to tell us, and we have to figure out ways of supporting that individual, regardless of their situation, and helping them navigate the police department, the criminal justice system, all the processes that come after they report the violence and abuse, because that is a significant barrier for many in the queer community in terms of disclosing the abuse and not knowing what the outcome is, right? Because and so I think the more information that we can provide, the more support, the more space that we can allow folks to make decisions for themselves, and be with them during that process is really critical, regardless of our role. But we know that there are many in the queer community, especially male-identified folks, trans men, gay men, bisexual men, trans men, who have these lived experiences, who are experiencing intimate partner violence or sexual abuse or sexual violence in all of its forms, right? Because whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, all the forms of abuse that can occur in relationships, it's even harder. I mean, a much more additional barriers that for them to come forward and disclose that abuse, right? Out of fear for their own safety, the fear for the safety of their partner, the fear of, being outed. And so I think it's really important that we allow the victim and survivor to decide for themselves how they want to proceed. And maybe it's not making a report, regardless of whether there are systems in place to protect the identity, the confidentiality of the victim and survivor. There are a lot of folks in the queer community who don't come forward, who never report the abuse to law enforcement, who never move through that system of holding the offender or offenders accountable for the abuse that they've experienced. And so we as a community, right, have an urgent responsibility to care for those individuals and to ensure that they get the healing and support and protection from the community. Right?
Hold on. I know you were going to keep going. I forgot you
okay.
were winded. And I love that. But you are. You be talking, child.
I know.
You really be talking. Okay, so, and I love it. Okay, I'm here for it. But, child, we got things. We got to get to it. So, what I heard was take care of yourself. Yes. Take care of yourself first. And also making sure that we recognize the humanity in our clients, not necessarily LGBTQ plus people, but all of us. We have our own intersections that we're bringing to the table, and we need to acknowledge those things when we're doing our jobs, and realize that there are avenues that are very official and a little less official, but someone's out here looking out for us all. I will say that my experiences with the TASA group has been really great, because as informal as it is, the trends of masculinity come up, the trends of not disclosing or using fewer words to express how they feel or what they went through. You have to have a lot more sessions sometimes to get to the bottom of the thing so people can finally get to that healing space. So I just have to say thank you for that. It's been very, very, very amazing. You mentioned one of my favorite groups of people, the trans community, whom we know by and large experience so much more violence in the queer community. I'm curious, Michael, how do you No, yeah. So what are some of the issues and concerns, or what are some of the issues from the system, like trying to help if someone does report? What are some of those issues coming up, not coming up for the trans community?
Well, for the trans community, number one is whether or not they wish to access us, and then being able to create an environment for them where we can provide them as much anonymity and protection as possible when they come forward. You talked about earlier the intersectionality of just queer identified or trans people, but you put on top of that the intersectionality of somebody who's HIV identified, right? You put on top of that maybe somebody because of age, correct? When we look at vulnerable populations, certainly individuals that not necessarily are just queer identified, but individuals with age issues, mobility issues, disability issues, those are all individuals that get preyed on quite a bit. So for trans identified individuals, one's it's being where they feel that they are heard and they are seen and they are able to identify that the way they should. We have taken steps within the Austin Police Department.
That was my next question, Shallow. Like, and what is the Austin Police Department saying?
So a lot of this stemmed from, I don't know if y'all remember Monica Loera. Does that name ring a bell with any of y'all?
Yes.
For anybody who doesn't know Monica, she was a trans sex worker who was murdered in Austin back when I worked in homicide. I actually had a small part in her case of working her investigation. The department dead named her and misidentified her in public documents because Monica had not had the opportunity, did not have the resources to have her legal identifiers changed. And our department, through ignorance at that time, felt that we had to identify her by her legal name and identifier, which was not the case. The department realized that was a very big aha moment for the department because of the pushback that we had received from the community. And that's why we've taken steps within our policies now that when somebody is trans identified, no matter how they identify, obviously we have to record their legal identifiers, but how we refer to them throughout the rest of the affidavit and through our interactions is by the name that they wish to be called and by the gender that they identify. And that's actually written into our policies. Officers can be disciplined for failing to do that in their reports. That was something that I helped write with some other individuals within the trans community. The other thing that we did is allow for anybody to get what we call a victim neutral affidavit. So a charging document, the document when we have, if I want to go arrest somebody, I have to write everything down into a document and present it to a judge. And the judge has to say, yes, I believe there's probable cause to make this arrest and approve it. That document is a public document. Anybody can get it. The news service goes down to the jail every single morning and looks through all the affidavits and the ones they think are, ooh, cool, that you see on the news, right? So we can ask for, and a survivor can request to have what we call victim neutral affidavit, which only identifies them by their first initial and last name in the first sentence of that affidavit. And then for the rest of that, we refer to them by the role they played in that affidavit, being a witness or a victim or whichever. So it helps give them some other anonymity in public documents. We've taken this stuff very seriously in writing those. We're not perfect, but it's a constant education and moving forward. It doesn't matter what policies we have in place, and Amelia talked about this, if somebody doesn't feel comfortable accessing us, we never get that opportunity to try to see if we can provide them what they need in moving forward. So being able to come and have a conversation with y'all and talk about these issues is really super important because it helps get the word out. I'm not saying we're perfect at the Austin Police Department, but we really, really try. And we're learning every single day. So that's one of the biggest things that we run across. But then there's tons of people that we've dealt with over a period of time that are trans. We have trans officers within our department. We have non-binary officers. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the city of Austin. Anybody who works for the city of Austin.
It's like we live here, but I was like, that was a long pause. It's like we live in the city of Austin.
I know y'all do. But just so y'all know kind of the city where you're at, and this happened because of an issue that happened with one of our trans officers getting healthcare, and why certain things cost him more than it cost somebody else who was not trans. And the city recognized that, and the city of Austin now has it in their policy that anybody who works for the city of Austin has complete and total trans-inclusive healthcare benefits while they work for the city of Austin. That all comes underneath that. So we're making strides. I don't know if that's getting to answer your questions.
To answer my question. I like that. I like that answer. You're great. I want to ask Emiliano sort of the same question though, because from your lens, maybe give me a trend or something that comes up often when dealing at TASA with trans individuals, with them reporting or making sure that TASA is keeping up with name identifiers and gender markers and all that wonderful stuff. Can you give me something?
Yeah, so what is unique about TASA is we are the Sexual Assault Coalition for Texas, right? We represent all the rape crisis centers in the state of Texas. So we represent SAFE, and they're all members of our coalition. You can become a member of TASA, and I encourage you to consider joining us. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to ensure organizations like SAFE here in Austin, if you're not familiar with SAFE, they are the local domestic violence sexual assault center for Austin and Travis County. So that they're your go-to. So when you're working with a client or that has these experiences, you want to refer them to Safe Alliance here in Austin to access those services. But I think for any individual, regardless of their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their age, their status, they have a right to access services, right? And just like APD, our centers can do better, right? The reason that APD and organizations like SAFE are trying to do better is because of the queer community and the kind of advocacy, the kind of demanding, the kind of organizing, the policy work that is happening. All of those things are really critical to ensure that folks, regardless of their identity, especially trans boys and men who are experiencing these issues, non-binary folks, other queer folks, can access services, right? And that's really key. But sometimes folks don't even go to SAFE, and that's okay, right? We need to tell survivors that they don't need to go to SAFE if they don't want to, right? Because SAFE hasn't always done a good job by the queer community as well, right? We have to acknowledge that, and we have to demand accountability and ensure that every survivor, regardless, again, has access to their services, right? And that's even harder for folks who are part of marginalized community within the queer community or that have trans or non-binary identity, right? So it's even harder for immigrants, folks who are undocumented, who don't speak English, right? So we have all of these very diverse communities, even within the queer community here in Austin, that makes it even more difficult for them to come forward and to access services. So that's why your role, that's why your relationship is so important. Each of us can support a survivor, a victim of abuse. We can help to ensure that they are safe, that they are protected without law enforcement intervention, without the intervention of SAFE. So it's really critical for us when we're observing, when we're noticing, when we're seeing those red flags, when we have a feeling in our gut that something is wrong, that something is happening to this person, that we intervene, that we say something, that we do something, especially for our elders and folks that who are experiencing different abilities, right? Especially for those folks, we have an obligation to report and to intervene when we believe that someone is being abused, and it's more than likely at the hands of a loved one, a provider. So it's really important that we take steps to protect those individuals, that we take that sense of responsibility for victims and survivors in our community, rather than just putting that all on APD or all on SAFE, right? We each share sort of a responsibility for keeping our community safe, especially the queer community and the folks that we serve. So I want to encourage us to think about what is the thing that we can do.
That was my next question. Like, how do we best assist someone living with assault and abuse? I feel like you got into it. It's the idea of like keeping your eyes and ears open, being aware of your own internal biases, and remembering that this is our work. Like, just because we don't like the situation doesn't mean we get to decide what's best for that client, or just because we don't particularly care for, let's just say, the way they look. Let's just say that. All right, we might not like the way they look, but they still need the service or they still need the help. You need to step back, keep your eyes and ears open, and get them to where they need to be. So, I mean, that's what I heard, at least. What would you say is one of the best ways to help?
No, I agree in regards to that is, first off, let's kind of just put some things into perspective. Within the queer community, what's that?
I'm excited.
Okay. Studies show that the rate of intimate partner violence and sexual violence is as high in the queer community, if not higher than it is in the heterosexual community. When it comes to the trans community, about 50% of trans identified individuals are going to be sexually assaulted at some point in their lifetime. Okay, there's some new studies that have come out of Australia, which are showing that nearly 3/4 of all trans identified individuals are going to suffer either intimate partner sexual violence or a hate crime in their lifetime. So realizing that the statistics are the same, if not higher, it allows you to realize or be able to look more globally at a situation and have the ability to be a bystander. What's that bystander effect? Is being able to see something that doesn't look right, sound right. When you're in a situation and you're seeing something where somebody is isolating somebody from their support services, when somebody's using that coercive control to manipulate somebody, right? How many of y'all have had friends, queer identified friends, right, where somebody in that relationship won't let that other person be their authentic self in public, will not let somebody else be their authentic self around other family members, who belittle them, gaslight them, beat them down? Be cognizant of that. Because what you're watching is you're watching the beginnings of a domestic violence situation occurring, right? When it comes to sexual assault, predators are going to prey on the most vulnerable. It doesn't matter whom they are. And individuals aren't going to be exclusive to sexuality in who they prey on. I worked in the sex offender unit at APD for several years after I was in sex crimes and in homicide. So since 2009, I've worked nothing but crimes against person, mainly intimate partner and sexual violence. But what I saw was somebody who would sexually abuse a 13-year-old girl would also sexually abuse a 27-year-old drunk male coming out of the bar, right? Predators find vulnerability wherever that vulnerability is, and that vulnerability may be due to alcohol. It may be due to cognitive abilities, right? Elderly getting preyed on quite a bit. And then the generational aspect of the elderly not wanting to come forward at all. How many of y'all know your parents, right? That will be like, hey, mom, this person just punched you. It's okay. It's not that bad. You're making more of it than what it is. You know, there's a generational gap of elderly individuals that generation just did not complain when something happened to them. Be cognizant of that area. And then the step that I think we want to get to is creating an environment where that person feels comfortable enough to say something to you. Emiliano had talked about the first call or the first conversation they're going to have when they have been victimized isn't going to be to me. It's going to be to you. It's going to be to a family member. It's going to be to somebody they trust. It's going to be somebody that they have rapport with. But be cognizant and allow that space for somebody to report. And then once that is, then we can look at, well, what services can we bring? And maybe it's TASA, maybe it's Safe Alliance, right? Maybe it's Waterloo Counseling Center if you happen to be trans-identified, right? Or one of the other many great places, the Kind Clinic, and what they're able to bring to bear. It's not always law enforcement, but don't discount things that you know when your gut's telling you that's not right. Chances are your gut's right, and pay attention to it and create that environment as best you can. The thing is trying to force somebody into something is never going to work, and that's not what we should be doing with survivors. They've already been traumatized enough. They don't need to be traumatized by maybe the only lifeline they have, which is y'all. Trying to goat them into something they're just not ready for yet. They will in time be able to do that when they feel comfortable enough to express it to you.
So, yes, you're amazing. Thank you for that. So this is the HIV and Aging Conference, so we should talk about HIV a little bit more, and just a little bit, so these wonderful people can hear the acronym 100 more times today. one of the things that we talked about for queer identified people not wanting to report was because of the idea of being outed. And that is very common when a person gets a new HIV status, right? And some of us have to report it. I don't have that mandate because I'm a nonprofit that is a social organization. So if a person tells me they're HIV positive, all I have to do is say, I'll get you to where you need to be, baby. But other people don't have that. So I guess the conversation I want to have is, how do you all handle the confidentiality of it versus the times where you're mandated to report an HIV status of someone who is been abused or is going through some sort of abuse scenario?
I'll say from our perspective, I'm not required to report. We're the police. There's HIPAA laws, there's HIPAA things in regards to that. There's also giving somebody a pseudonym if that happens to come forward out of the situation. There's certain communities that are more disproportionately affected by HIV than others. Communities of color are very much disproportionately affected by new HIV diagnosis. But if that information comes forward, that's not pertinent to what I have to do in regards to a sexual assault or domestic violence. I don't need to know what your status is. If it comes to my attention, that's something that is kept confidential moving forward. And there's plenty of HIPAA laws that protect that.
Thank you, Sergeant. Yeah, I mean, I think if a victim survivor comes forward and they're accessing services, of course, the process, whether they're calling a 24-hour hotline at SAFE or at any rape crisis center in the state, they can access those services at any time, regardless of their situation. They can call and access services. But in that process of conducting intakes, like all of us do, we have responsibilities for documenting services that we're providing. The individual can remain anonymous. They don't have to provide or share any information that they don't want to with us. But everything that they share is confidential, right? Now, there's no reason in that initial process for them to share that or to feel obligated to share any of their medical history, including their HIV status. It's not, and if they do, all of that information is protected, right? So every rape crisis center follows the same laws in terms of confidentiality and HIPAA, in terms of protecting that information and not disclosing it unless there's some sort of court order or court mandate. But they are not going to disclose that information, especially to the person who was abusive or people who are abusive to them. So that's not going to happen. Now, for an individual that is an elder in our community that has HIV status, that is accessing sexual assault nurse examinations, so if they want to collect evidence in the hospital, again, that doesn't have to be provided to law enforcement. They can just collect that evidence immediately after a sexual assault. That's really important. So for anyone that is experiencing some form of act of sexual violence, for them to collect that evidence immediately, right? Because unfortunately, a lot of victims will remove the clothing, they will take a shower, they will bathe, they will all the things. And again, for some offenders, some perpetrators, in terms of the language that Sergeant was using, that is intentional. There are folks who will clean up the scene of the crime, and the victim, their body is the scene of the crime. And so it's really important that in that process, that when they are getting examined, that they do disclose their status. And if they're not receiving treatment, or if they didn't even know they were HIV positive, or then the nurse will provide resources, information, medication, all the things that the individual needs in order to, as well as referrals to your organizations to ensure that they have services once they leave the hospital. But I think even that information is maintained, is confidential. And again, the hospital, which is primarily the ones that are conducting it. SAFE has a facility here in Austin where they conduct private sexual assault nurse examinations by trained nurses who are specifically responsible for collecting that evidence and either providing it to law enforcement if the victim decides that they want to move forward with that investigative process, or just holding that and putting it into the crime lab so that in the future, if the individual decides that they want to they want to report the sexual assault, they can. So all of those things are really critical. They're informed throughout that process of their rights. They have access to an advocate. So if you or someone you know or that you're working with, it's really important that they are informed and they understand that they don't have to do any of this alone, that there are advocates, right? There are people who are going to inform them of their rights and remind them of how important consent is and throughout all of these processes, because it can be tremendously confusing, scary, right? Because of the uncertainty of this information that I'm sharing with a provider, what will happen to that information? So it's really important that you encourage your clients to ask questions, that they seek support throughout all the steps of the investigative process and the criminal justice system in terms of holding those the individual perpetrator or perpetrators accountable. So yeah, all of that information is yours and you don't have to share it.
I love that. So yeah, Rob, I am not keeping good track of time. Okay, thank you. Rob, everybody. Okay, so something came up in my mind when I was thinking about this, and one of the ways that I've always thought all patients can have a better experience in all of our facilities or organizations is cross-training as you go up the process. So from intake to the end of service, or to when they're on their own doing the thing with us, if the person at the end doesn't know what the front desk is doing or what the intake form already said, how many of you cannot stand putting your date of birth and saying your first and last name every 20 seconds in the same building for the same 20 minutes? It's like, girl, I was around the corner. I get it, but I ain't changed faces. It's the same person. So it's things like that. And having the conversation with your colleagues about HIV 101. Yeah, you might be dealing with housing and you might understand that this is specific to people living with HIV, but if you don't understand how HIV works, then you might be saying triggering wording. Like, honey, you need to know what I'm doing so I can get them to you and we can get them on and out of here so they can get their life together. So I'm saying that to say the same thing with you all, because it sounds like y'all's process from the ground up, everyone knows what's going on. Like from when it's being reported to when you're talking to the victim, everybody's on the same page. The goal is to get them into care or get it reported, make sure that everyone's respected, make sure that the evidence is collected in a way that is not just respectful, but is actually going to get the case solved.
Sure. Absolutely. And the issue though is there's turnover, right? People leave, people move. We have systems in place that work really, really well together. But it's that constant retraining. And then it's like when you talked earlier about trans individuals, like if somebody's going to go have a forensic exam, a rape exam, right? A forensic sexual assault exam. Is that person somebody who is competent in dealing with trans issues, the one that's doing the exam? Making sure that that's a competent individual that we're sending, that medical professional we're sending that client to. Those are important details. But overall, yeah, there is this, we try to have that continuity, but there are times that because of new people coming in and not knowing each other and not being able to communicate, balls get dropped. But overall, we try very, very hard for all of us to know what everybody does. And we're fortunate in Austin in the fact that we have a SART team, sexual assault resource and response team that handles adult sexual assault. On the DV side of the house, domestic violence side of the house, we have the same. On the child abuse side of the house, we have care teams. And all of those are now mandated by state law to talk and work with each other. So we are getting much better in the state of Texas. That was a big legislative change that just happened. I don't know, the state legislature stays, I don't know, the governor won't let people go. He's held them hostage for a while. But the one prior to this one is when that big law changed that requires every county to have a SART, a sexual assault resource and response team. to fix the issues you're talking about and to make sure throughout the state of Texas you create that. But it takes some time. It's not quite there yet.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, that's not, I want to be clear because I think it's really important that part of our role is to provide really concise, clear information so that the expectation of the victim is they understand exactly what is happening throughout these processes, right? SAFE is not sharing information with APD. So whatever information SAFE has about a victim of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, etc., they have it. It's not going into a state system. There's no, if I have to refer a client out of Travis County, they're going to have to disclose and they're going to have to go through a whole intake process. And the victim is going to have to tell the same nurse at the hospital their story all over again. So one of the things that we have to do is prepare our clients and help them understand that you are going to have to disclose your story multiple times to multiple people in graphic detail. And we need to be careful that we don't re-traumatize the victim, right? That we ensure that they understand and that they understand that these systems are complicated, and that in order for them to navigate them, they're going to need support, right? They're going to need support. They need information. They need to understand the limits around confidentiality, because SAFE will never disclose information that a victim gives them to APD, right? Now, they in their system may be able to share information in terms of law enforcement at APD, but they're not going to share that information with the Texas Department of Public Safety or with the FBI unless they have consent from the victim or survivor to disclose that information, right? So consent is really important part of this process, right? You sign a confidentiality agreement, so whatever information is provided to you by your clients, you are responsible for keeping, for maintaining their records to ensure that their safety and their confidentiality is kept very close, right? Because to Jeremy's point, people have a right to disclose their HIV status or their experiences of violence themselves. You do not have that right to disclose that unless they give you the consent or the permission to make a call for them, to access information, to access resources. We really need to ensure that we have the consent at every point in this process from the victim or survivor. That's really, really important. But I just want to be clear that the information that they share with us, right, in terms of the Rape Crisis Center, the Domestic Violence Center, does not go into some state or national center or collection. You know, there's not a database where that information goes. So I think it's really important for us to understand that every Rape Crisis Center and Domestic Violence Center in the state, they're all independent nonprofit organizations that have their own policies and procedures. But again, they're maintaining their own records and not sharing those records with anyone outside of those organizations without the consent, sometimes the written consent of that victim or survivor. So, yeah.
And that's what I just wanted to clarify. And Emilio was saying that. What I meant by we all work together is we all understand what the process is.
Yeah.
If somebody wants a forensic exam, if they want a rape kit or a rape exam done, in Texas, they can either go and have that done and never report to law enforcement or until sometime later. And there may be reasons for that, right? If they're in an intimate partner violence situation, they want to collect the evidence, but they're not in a place where they feel safe to make that report, right? Because they're afraid of the retribution that'll happen. But we understand what that process is. Should they wish to access the criminal justice system, they would report. We would have advocates that would show up. They would go to one of the facilities to have the forensic exam done. And then that exam, at that point, obviously all the consents have been handled at that point to share that with law enforcement. Their status and stuff may get shared if it's critical to the case, but it doesn't necessarily always get shared in regards to that. That's what I was meaning, like we understand the processes in each lane we're supposed to stay in, but we communicate amongst the lanes as to what the processes are, and we respect that on both sides.
Did that answer either one of your questions?
Well, there's actually another entity that gets involved with my client. That's newer to the people that I work with that have disabilities, and that's Adult Protective Services.
APS, yeah.
Yep.
So they're generally my first contact.
Exactly.
Report it to APS.
Yeah.
Correct. And some of those reports come directly to APD, as well as Child Protective Services reports come to APD because of mandated reporting requirements that are written into the law.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think that's really important to understand is that, and all of us in this room, right, are mandatory reporters of child abuse and elder abuse and folks with disabilities. If we suspect, if we know, even if we have a gut feeling that something just does not feel right, it's not our job to investigate it. It's not our job to intervene, to say anything. Our job is to report that directly to, again, Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, right, to allow them to conduct the investigation to determine whether there is abuse occurring. It's really important that we ourselves as providers stay safe, physically safe, right? And so we have to be conscious of when we intervene, we are putting ourselves and potentially that victim at risk as well. So while Sergeant is right in terms of our role as bystanders, we need to be hyper aware and trust our gut when we're in these situations, because they can easily escalate. And to Sergeant's point, we can become the victim of that violence or abuse. There have been plenty of folks, law enforcement, advocates, providers, who have been killed, right, in domestic violence situations. I'm not saying this to scare you, but unfortunately, it is the reality, to Sergeant's point, that a person who is being abusive to a person who is elderly, who has a disability, that is abusing their partner, right, or a provider that's abusing their client, they will do anything to stop people from finding out, and they will do anything to the person who is trying to intervene, including law enforcement. So we really need to ensure not just our safety, but the safety of our clients. Yeah.
Hold that thought. Is it just out of curiosity? Because I got three questions. I got three questions. Is something that can be held for maybe like 15 minutes? Okay, I adore you. You're the best. And because I want to make sure y'all get like a good solid 15 at the end of this to ask the questions. So get them ready. Okay. Y'all are the best, and I love this conversation. I feel like we could have this conversation all day long. But we've talked a lot about LGBTQ plus people, because that's essentially what we came to talk about. But we haven't really had a conversation about the Asian community, which is the other half of the reason we're here today. I can say that without any hesitation, the community of people let's just say over the age of 50, have been such a joy to work with as colleagues and as clients. I've learned more about this work from the people who've been doing it since almost forever, since the inceptions of some of these policies or organizations themselves, and it's just been so rewarding. But the question is, how do you see the lack of reporting of assault and abuse affecting people aging? How are you seeing this affect them?
What's happening is they're suffering in silence because they're not getting resources from APS, or they're not being able to have somebody else respond. And it's difficult. You have somebody who's elderly. We all know that most people, as they start to get up in the age, it's very easy for them to bruise, right? And it's difficult to know, was that a bruise that because they slipped and fell, or is it a bruise because somebody punched them, right? And some family members may discount that and not bring that forward, or not necessarily family members, just others, right? So, and then you have some cognitive abilities. But to answer your question, the failure of that being brought forward for anybody to look at, right, means that you have somebody who continues to suffer in private and not be able to receive the resources that they need to get out of an abusive situation. And quite frankly, we don't have really good systems in Austin for people who are elderly. Where are they going to stay? If they can't, we don't have, there's Safe Alliance, but that's for domestic violence and sexual abuse, right? But where do we have somebody who's 70 years old that has medical issues, that has some ambulatory issues? Where are they going to be able to stay other than maybe with a family member, right? Unless they're put in a group home somewhere. And quite frankly, our group homes in Austin are not the group homes just overall are not necessarily the best place for people who are up in years. Trying to get that information out and to be aware of that and provide them resources or an avenue where they can get away from that abuser. If that abuser is the one that's paying for the electricity bill or where they're at, sometimes they may be very reluctant to say, this person's hurting me, right? So that's part of the problem.
Yeah, it's a really important question for us to consider, especially the folks in this room, right? One of the things that we at TASA do is we believe that training and providing technical assistance to providers like yourself, organizations, institutions that are serving the aging community, the queer community, whatever community, that they have the training that they need, because again, to Sergeant's point, sometimes it's us who are providing those services because the victim, is unable to go to physically to an agency. So every individual in the room, we believe, should be trained to understand sexual violence in all of its forms, including domestic violence, dating violence, other forms of abuse. We need to have just a minimum understanding of what that looks like and understand the impact that it has on the clients that we serve, right? Because a lot of folks will come forward much later in life. They will disclose maybe their HIV status is a result of a sexual assault, right? So we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of trauma, and there could be a long history of abuse that they had before they came into a facility where they're receiving long-term care because of their status or because of their age. So it's really important that all of us in this room are trained to understand these issues and are able to recognize them when they're occurring, and when, again, even if it's your gut, even if you feel like something is wrong, something is happening, something's out of place, something feels weird about this relationship or about the harm that is happening or the bruise that you're talking about, Sergeant, like again, our role is not to investigate, right? There are law enforcement agencies that's what their job is. They will investigate, they will determine who and how the abuse is being, how that individual is being harmed. But again, if we don't intervene, individuals could die, right? We need to understand that. There were hundreds of individuals here in Texas of all ages, races, sexual orientations, gender identities that were killed here in Texas due to domestic violence that we know of, right? That we determined that homicide was a result of domestic violence or sexual assault or stalking or dating violence. But all of us have a tremendous amount of power to intervene, to ensure that our clients are safe and that the people in our communities are safe. So it's not SAFE's responsibility or APD's responsibility to keep the folks that we serve safe. It's our responsibility collectively as a community, because again, those individuals may never be able to report the abuse. They may choose not to come forward and go to APD and make a report. They may never access services that's safe. They may not be physically, emotionally, mentally able to access those services. That's just a reality. So we, as a community of providers, have an important responsibility to protect those individuals and ensure that no more harm comes to them. And so again, we all have an important responsibility. I hope you walk away with just that sense of obligation and just the desire to say something, to do something when we believe that violence and abuse is happening. And it doesn't have to be just SAFE. It doesn't have to be TASA. It doesn't have to be APD. It's all of us.
Listen, you're kind of just taking me right into my next questions, and I straight up appreciate it because it makes it so much easier to do this. But I need a verbal yes if you're still with me. Yes. Okay, it's in the afternoon. I get it. Y'all ate, and it's hot-ish. It's feeling cozy in this room. Got a little more time. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the client and the kind of the outward facing, but this is about caregivers and those of us who work in these services. The question is, how do you prevent caregiver burnout? But I feel like I want to kind of expound on it and give a little more context. How are you all in your work? I kind of want to make it personal, give example, because I feel like we've talked about burnout a lot, like as a like a big deal thing, but no one really talks about it as like, what do I do to make sure that I don't get burned out, and helpfully ensure or give best practice to my colleagues. So how do you all try and prevent burning out? Or maybe you already have and you're just working through it.
That's a phenomenal question. It really, really is. I am somebody that's very, very passionate about mental health and mental well-being for service providers. I've been in the business 37 years. Recently saw what happened with APD, but a dear friend of mine, she decided a few weeks ago that she had enough and took her own life as a law enforcement officer. Last year, I had another buddy of mine that did the same. So it's something that's very, very personal to me, and I'm sorry we're getting deep, but it's the reality of it. You cannot do this work and it not affect you and you not take some of this on. You can't sit across from somebody who has been traumatized and victimized and hear their account of what happened and not take some of it on. It's akin to asking yourself to walk through water and not getting wet. It just doesn't happen. So for me, I'm very, very fortunate. I recognized this a long time ago, and I recognize this from people like you all in the room, advocates. I would not be where I am today if it was not for the amazing advocates that I have had the pleasure of learning from over a period of time and understanding self-care and how to do that. I have a very, very loving, amazing husband. I have a gorgeous, beautiful daughter who's 30-something years old. She says she's grown, but she's not. I love her to death, but I also have a great amount of friends that are around me that I can pick up at any moment of the day and night and say, hey, can we talk? One of my dearest friends works for TASA. She's a retired detective from the Austin Police Department. She taught me when I went to sex crimes many, many years ago. And I cannot tell you how many times she has called me in the middle of the night. I have called her in the middle of the night and had a conversation. Part of that is is first off recognizing you're not by yourself in this work. That's the first thing. Sometimes we internalize so much stuff and we think, I'm the only one feeling this. I'm the only one that feels overwhelmed. I'm the only one that is experiencing what's happening in life. And that's not the case. There's so many other people that are there, but being able to sit and talk and find that avenue to offload things. I love to cook. I love to travel. I love to work with my hands. I love to do something other than police work. One of the things I do is I'm the senior bagpiper for the department. And I love to get out and go play pipes in my backyard and do that.
It's cute.
Jeremy's seen me in my kilt. It's okay. I was just looking at those wedding pictures yesterday. Okay. Jeremy was, I don't mind saying, he was our wedding coordinator. I married my husband on September 30th, and he's an amazing, amazing man that I'm very fortunate to have. But creating those support systems, right? I know I'm giving y'all a lot of personal information about myself, but recognizing you're not alone. You're not alone doing this. And it's kind of like the same things you're saying to your clients. When you're asking your clients, and Emilio had talked about that, and expressing to them they're not alone, that there's all these other people that pick up and help, so are y'all. I would rather get a call from somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning and get up and go have a conversation with them over a glass of tea or perhaps something a little bit stronger and have some time to talk, than to get a call at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and find out that backpack just got too heavy for that person and they figured there was only one way out, and it was to not be with us anymore. Doing that, there's plenty of people that are willing to help you, but find something you enjoy, whatever it is. Maybe it's walking the dog. Maybe it's calisthenics. Maybe it's, I don't know, woodworking. Maybe it's gardening. Find something that is different than what you do in your day in and day out job that gives you pleasure, and don't deny yourself that. You're worth it. Everything that you do, you're worth it, because if you're not here, you can't help others. And that's how you keep yourself safe, and that's how you keep yourself in a good spot.
Yeah, thank you, Sergeant Michael, and congratulations. And I'm sorry, like, also for your loss, because that impacts us, right? These are people that we know and that we love and that we work with. There are probably people in the room who, you know, live with depression, who have friends or family who have experienced suicide. So when we talk and when we think about these things, it's really important we take care of ourselves, right? That's how I started at the beginning, just really taking care of yourself, whatever that meant for you, just taking a walk, getting some water, going to the restroom, taking a phone call, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself during this day. It's not over, right? We're here at this conference. But I think one of the really unique ways of self-care is just kind of look around the room and how many folks have you talked to? How many folks have you connected with? This is an amazing community. This is a community of folks who are doing similar work, who are providers, who have dedicated their life to taking care of people, right? And just checking with each other, exchanging information, just having a conversation, reaching out to each other, like Sergeant said, and just checking in, seeing how you're doing is so important, so critical. And for us to be able to do this work, I would not be here if it wasn't for a community of support. If my partner, if my family and my friends weren't supportive, encouraging me, if I didn't take breaks, like actual breaks, took vacation, took sick days, all the things, take those days, folks. Take those days, you deserve them. You've worked hard to take breaks, enjoy those vacations, go out there and live like your best life, right? Do things that make you happy. Surround yourself by people that know and love you and that accept you for who you are, right? So do things that bring you joy, that completely, to Sergeant's point, that are completely outside of the work. Whatever those hobbies are, if it's reading, if it's writing, if it's doing pottery, whatever it is, even if it's therapy. I especially want to encourage the masculine identified folks in the room that to be vulnerable, like especially with the men in their life. Jeremy was talking about our community of men, male identified folks from around the state and the country and territories that gather on a monthly basis and engage in really hard conversations, because there's a lot of wrapped up in our identity as men. And so it's really important that we have a community of male identified folks, of masculine identified folks that we can talk to, that we can be vulnerable with, so we can be our true selves. And me and Jeremy have been able to share that space with other masculine identified folks. And it's been phenomenal. It's my way. It's why I'm still here 16 years later, and have been doing this work for decades as a victim advocate, a prevention educator, as a state trainer. So I think ultimately, whatever it is that brings you joy, do it, right? But make sure that you're also that you're encouraging your clients, the people that you work with, your coworkers, to take care of themselves as well, to find things that bring them joy, that bring them peace, that bring them safety, and that bring them healing, right? Because as we're talking about status, as we're talking about the interpersonal violence, it's tremendous trauma. And unfortunately, that trauma lives in our bodies. We see it every day in terms of how it's impacted our clients. And so it's really important for them to take care of their mental health, for them to get therapy, and for us to figure out how they can access that, right? And make sure that it's accessible to them and that they get the mental health services that they deserve, and that they need to heal from the traumas that they've experienced. So yeah, wonderful way to end the panel. Thank you.
Whoa, no,
Jeremy.
we're not done, baby.
Oh, no, I know we got questions.
Are you kidding me? I'm a fan of Beyonce and I have a wireless mic. I'm in the people's. Okay. We had a question raised already. I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to just do it like this. Okay, cool. Sorry for the Zoom people. Y'all are awesome. We have one question back here. If you do have a question, just raise your hand. I'll come to you. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Okay. All right. Go for it, boo-boo.
Thank you. I have a question for the sergeant. Can you please describe the difference between the word rape and sexual assault?
Yeah, so The FBI used to define rape as the carnal knowledge of an individual through the contact of male genitalia to female genitalia. Rape and sexual assault are the same thing. Sexual assault encompasses more because rape is defined by the FBI as simply penis to vagina, whereas, I shouldn't say simply, but as penis to vagina versus sexual assault, which involves penetration of the mouth, anus, or other sexual organ, or the penetration of the female sexual organ by other means other than a penis.
Thank you. I was a counselor at the Travis County Jail for 7 years, and that used to be kind of intertwined back and forth as to how it was written down on the charge on the person. Right. So, thank you.
Yeah, and that's an important point. There's a Texas Penal Code, the way that it's defined, right? But we also need to understand that sexual violence is not always physical. There doesn't have to be penetration in order for it to be a form of sexual violence or sexual abuse. That happens on a spectrum, right? Which include physical, like manipulating somebody, exposing something to sexual material, forcing them to do something on themselves or to somebody else. These are all forms of sexual violence abuse. Taking pictures, right, of that individual and putting those online. So there's a lot of different forms of sexual violence and sexual abuse that don't involve penetration or physical contact with the victim, right? And that's really important for us to understand, that in the context of the law, right, the law enforcement and the criminal justice system has to prove that a crime was committed under the Texas Penal Code. A lot of times the offender intentionally will ensure that there is no evidence, there is no physical act, it could be something that they're saying to the person. Sexual harassment is a crime. That does not involve any physical act. Right. So it's really difficult for us and for survivors to find justice because it's really hard to prove that a sexual violence occurred, because it's usually done with intentionally in private. No witnesses, right? Just the victim and the offender or offenders. So it's really important for us to understand that all of those things that are under that penal code may never get prosecuted because there's absolutely no proof. APD is doing a phenomenal job of investigating, collecting evidence, making recommendations to the district attorney's office, looking for prosecutions. But we know that prosecutions in the state of Texas around sexual violence, sexual abuse are very low because of lack of evidence. Right. So it's really important for us to keep that in mind and to be honest and open with our victims that they may never receive justice. The statute of limitations might have passed. There's no evidence of the abuse. Right. It's going to be difficult for them to prove that individual assaulted them or abused them in the court of law. So it's really important for us to understand that. Right. And for us to acknowledge that and to seek justice. And everyone in this room can join TASA and help us really revising and ensuring that there's policy and there's legislation that protects victims and survivors of sexual violence and that holds offenders accountable. We still have so much work to do here in Texas, but TASA cannot do that alone. We need all of you to join us and become members of our organization in order to support that work. Go for it, Jeremy.
Jump in on you. Do we have any more questions? Oh, hold up now. Come in. I'm in platforms. Give me a second.
I was just wondering if you could speak to, so with mandated reporting, is there a difference of when somebody should reach out directly to law enforcement versus going through CPS or Adult Protective Services?
Great question. So I want you to clarify that the way the statute is written on mandatory reporting, it requires you to report to either CPS or to Adult Protective Services, right? It does not require you to report to law enforcement. So I want everybody to understand what the mandatory requirement is. However, there's a judgment call, right? Like if there's an exigency in the fact that there's a safety issue, an immediate safety issue, right? Nobody says you can't make dual reports. You can't call 911 and you can't notify CPS. We're required, obviously, to notify CPS as well, or APS, either one of those two. So to answer your question, which one you do, by all means, follow what the statute says in reporting to the agencies. However, I think you need to consider if there is a safety issue where somebody's, if you don't get immediate services there, may get harmed. That's when you need to consider also making the report to 911. Okay, keeping in mind, survivors may, you got to do what the survivor wants, but I'm talking about if you have somebody who's non-communicative as an elderly patient and somebody is going to be beating them or strangling them, I don't need you calling APS. I need a 911 call, right? Because there's no way APS is going to get out there to resolve the situation. Does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is to be really familiar with your agency's policies and procedures about being a mandatory reporter, right? Like familiarizing yourself with those things so that you are also communicating internally in terms of whatever the process is before you make those calls, right? So, and then what information you need, if any, that you need to provide to your clients, right, around those reporting. But Sergeant is right in terms of like, if we're witnessing, observing, or we believe that violence is happening, like we need to call the police. And again, don't intervene. I want to keep everyone in this room safe. Some of us are braver than others. Some of us do not care, right? We will protect the people around us. Don't risk your life. Allow law enforcement to intervene in that situation. Because you're putting yourself at harm, and it could actually escalate the violence or abuse that your client or the patient is experiencing. So I want us to really keep that in mind, right? Really keep that in mind. There's a phenomenal book called Protecting the Gift, right, by Gavin DeBecker, who's former law enforcement, and who really wrote about trusting our gut, trusting our instincts in those situations. I encourage all of you to read it. It's a phenomenal book. It prepares us, and all of us have it. All of us have that feeling. We've all experienced it in this room. So I want to encourage you to tap into that and really trust your gut, trust your instinct when you feel like something is not right. Even again, if you don't witness the abuse happening, even if you don't hear about it, but you just have a belief, something doesn't feel right, report it. Allow law enforcement or allow adult protective services, allow child protective services to investigate those things. Because again, you could be intervening and saving a child's life or an elder's life, and that is critically important, right? Because we don't want to see any harm or deaths occur as a result of violence or abuse. So thank you for that question.
We had talked about how older adults tend to be victims of abuse. And you had mentioned that one of the red flags to look for is when someone is using controlling language around them. For those of us, which is basically everybody in the room, who are serving older adults, particularly those who are living with cognitive issues, who can't advocate for themselves, what are some of the warning signs we need to keep our eyes open for as we're going into someone's home, providing home health service? And what do we need to look for that say, hey, something's not right here?
That's a great question. The human body is really, really unique in that even though it may not say something, as far as orally, we're getting so much information looking at the demeanor of somebody and how they're responding. And we do this with children all the time. It's one of the things when we're talking about sexual assault, proving sexual assault is looking at behavioral changes of somebody who has been traumatized. Looking for that, especially somebody who is not who has some cognitive abilities in speaking, but if you're seeing them recoil, if you see their body positioning changing when that person goes into the room and then leaves, that's an indication something's not right. And they may not be able to communicate that, but you seeing that and witnessing that on a repetitive time lets you know that there's probably something going on there. And when you have the ability to explore that further, when you're safe and that other person's not there, we can bring services together or forward to try to understand and paint that picture a little bit better of what that abuse may look like. But that's a big thing that we look for. Especially, I work in child abuse, and that's one of the key indicators that you find with children is a change in behavioral habits or behavior because of the trauma that they've faced. And when you get to be somebody who's elderly, that's a very big key indicator of that.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Oh my God, that's so great. Y'all have all the questions.
One of the things that I'm seeing with my gay male seniors is their use of like scruff and those type of things, because you can order out, and they get very lonely, so they start using those.
Right.
And I'm a bit concerned about, are they thinking about the safety aspects of it?
And oftentimes they may not. A big thing about Scruff and Grindr and a lot of the other search engines, right, is they are being used and manipulated by predators to gain access to somebody to take advantage of them. Huge. So it's definitely worth having that conversation with somebody who's older to make sure that they're taking those steps to keep themselves safe as best they can. Letting, and there's all sorts of things that you can put out, letting somebody know where you're going, let somebody know where the address you're going to go to if you're leaving the home. If they're bringing somebody else into the home, letting somebody know, hey, I'm having a date, come over for the next hour and a half, or whatever. Made him laugh. Whatever, what the situation is, but having that conversation with them, because we have seen several cases of individuals that have utilized those platforms to prey on others. When I was in homicide, we had a couple of individuals that intentionally targeted immigrant, queer identified individuals to harm them because of that vulnerability.
What a great question. I think we want people, regardless of their age, right, regardless of their identity, to explore their sexuality in healthy ways, right, in safe ways, right? That's a big part of the work that we do. Folks, everyone in this room has that right to explore those things. And Sergeant is right. Unfortunately, there are individuals. Vast majority of folks that are using those apps, they're well-intentioned. They're also looking for the same thing. They're looking for connection. They're looking to have a sexual experience. They're looking for affection, whatever it may be, right? On the context of all the things that we need emotionally, physically, sexually, mentally, right? We all deserve to do those things and experience those things safely. I think it's really important, to Sergeant's point, to inform all of us. All of us need to be aware and conscious of the risks, and also to trust, again, our gut in those situations, right? Folks will usually give indicators of their intent, right? And so we need to train and support each other and help us understand to look for those red flags, right? It's not just consensual romantic relationships. It's all, regardless of our relationships, there are going to be things that are going to show up, whether it's the texts that are being exchanged, the intensity, the love bombing, the immediacy of those things, the wanting to access other things. So people, we do need to do some safety planning for ourselves. I think Sergeant is right. There are people in this room who will let people know where they're at, right? We'll give them their actual GPS, so that there are people who are part of marginalized communities that have to keep themselves safe. We have to acknowledge that that's the reality. But again, all of us here in Austin and Travis County have a responsibility to look out for each other, to look out for our neighbors, to look out for our friends and our family members and the folks in our community and our clients. All of us, right? All of us need just to be aware and keep each other safe, right? That's what's so wonderful and amazing about the queer community, is that we have a sense of responsibility for each other's safety. And so that's really important, that we're having open, honest communication, and that we're able to enjoy ourselves, that we're able to live our lives, that we're able to explore our sexuality however we want, with whomever we want, wherever we want, at any time we want, right? We believe that at TASA, that everyone deserves the right to engage in healthy sexual relationships without violence, without abuse, right? Without control, all the things that then go into that, step over into the line of violence and abuse and rape and other forms of sexual violence, right? So we definitely need to have conversations with ourselves, right? And with young people and with our elders and everyone in our community. We need to have these conversations, right? Because it's so important just for our safety and our sense of enjoyment of being able to live freely and to be who we are and to celebrate our sexuality, all the things that are wonderful and beautiful about the queer community, regardless of your age, regardless of your status. you have the right to live your life freely, right?
Do you moonlight as a life coach? Because you be really going for it, and I'm here for it. Listen, honey, sometimes I need motivation. I'm gonna call you more often, okay?
Hey,
I'm gonna call you.
you
I
have
just
my
adore
number,
you.
Jeremy.
I
You know where
do.
to
I got
find
your
me.
number. I know how to get a hold of you. Okay, so I think I might have like 2 minutes because I want to just get to this real quick. Thank you all for doing this. We have talked about some resources. We've talked about SAFE. We've of course talked about APD. We've of course talked about TASA. Can you think of any other organizations, like right off the top of your head right now, that you would throw out as resources for domestic violence, sexual assault, people who are helping people get better education, things like that?
Yeah, so there are two specific numbers. Unfortunately, we have two national hotlines. The National Domestic Violence Hotline, and you can just Google it. There's also a text option available for folks with different abilities that are unable to call, right? So that's really wonderful, and they have all kinds of accessibility services that they provide for a 24-hour hotline for domestic violence, dating violence, those kinds of things. There's a national sexual assault hotline called RAIN, the Rape Abuse Incidents Network. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. Again, it's accessible to anyone, regardless of their age, their sexual orientation, their language, etc. Like their abilities. You can access those services. So those two numbers are really important that we share with all of our clients, right? That we provide them with a number, not just of SAFE here in Austin and Travis County, but with those 24-hour hotlines, because again, they may, and SAFE has a 24-hour hotline as well. So it's really important that we have just, a card with that information, a brochure, a resource. So you can go to TASA.org. You can access all of our brochures in multiple languages and share those with your clients, either digitally or physical copies of our brochures. But there's all kinds of really amazing resources. But there's also community resources, right? There are organizations and institutions in Austin and Travis County that don't get funded to provide services, right? That are supporting and working with and healing victims of violence and crime. So definitely refer those folks to those agencies where they may be more comfortable with, right? Whether it's ALGO or other queer organizations in this community, right? There are other organizations and institutions that are providing safety and support. So that's really important.
What about you, Sergeant Mike?
He took all of my good pieces.
He took all my good stuff.
The only other thing that I would suggest, a couple of organizations, Out Youth, especially if you're working with anybody. Out Youth has a phenomenal center for trans and non-binary individuals, and it extends past just youth. The Kind Clinic is also an area that has phenomenal resources if you want to contact the Kind Clinic as well. Waterloo Counseling Center is also another one that you can reach out to. Some of these lines, I know they're hotlines, but they're available 24 hours a day. And if you have some questions, you can go on their websites, you can look out and you can ask for things. If you want more information talking about elder abuse, there's an elder abuse hotline as well. If you're wanting to figure out what were some of the signs that may indicate abuse that I'm seeing here, you can reach out and ask for some clarification and help you get a better picture of what you're seeing and what you're dealing with, and provide resources to your clients as well.
I'm going to throw in Black Trans Leadership Austin.
That's right.
I'm throwing in Ashwell, ATX, and I'm throwing in my own organization, Beyond Brother. So all that wonderful stuff. Thank you all so much for this. Give them a round of applause.